Hello, and welcome to another episode of Cannabis Last Week in our interview segment. I need to give my standard disclaimer. By night, I fight crime as a mass vigilante, but by day, I practice cannabis and/or IP and/or psychedelic law for Zuber Lawler. So I have to note that any views are my own and not those of the law firm. And having said that, I have the very, very distinct pleasure of speaking with Klee Irwin right now. He is CEO and chairman of Irwin Naturals, which you started back in 1994. And you're also director of Quantum Gravity Research, a nonprofit research institute that you founded all the way back in 2009. So thank you for joining.
Thank you.
A lot of very, very interesting stuff to discuss. I think we're quite like-minded individuals, but I'd love to just understand a little bit of the evolution, right? In terms of how Irwin Naturals started and the goals there, because I see a through point all the way into what your focuses are on now.
Okay.
Right. So,
all right. Well, my life has been punctuated by a lot of luck and just being at the right place at the right time. And so what happened is I started this business in 1994, and I was lucky enough not to have any rich uncles or have any knowledge on how to convince a bank to give me an SBA loan. So I had to borrow about $2,000 on my credit card, and that was basically my seed capital. And which wasn't even seed capital because now I owed that money at 18% interest. So anyway, I started the business, and I knew I didn't have money to compete against these bigger herbal supplement vitamin companies also selling to stores. And that scared the heck out of me. So in other words, like, you coming in, you don't have a brand that anyone has heard of, and you can't advertise because you've got no money, and you're just begging some store to put their, your product on the shelf. And what can you give them in exchange for the fact that you can't advertise? So what I did give them is the only thing I could. I said, look, if I had a bankroll to spend the standard 15% of sales on advertising, then I would do that, but I don't. So how about I take that 15% and I just shove it into the cost of goods to make the ingredients more potent. And maybe we'll get lucky and a higher potency without, raising the price, since I just stole it from the advertising column. Maybe that'll make people just buy it and talk to their friends about it at a faster rate. Okay, so I got a few stores to say, okay, let's give it a try. And because of its extreme potency and effectiveness relative to the retail price, it actually started flying off the shelves. And so then at that point, I knew that I had something on my hands. So I did a land grab. So in my mind, once I see an opportunity, I stay paranoid on purpose. Like, I think, well, what if this is a mirage and it all just disappears, right? So you want to seize the day. So my seizing the day was to really get up to thousands of health food stores carrying our products in a shockingly short period of time. And so that's really the first land grab that I did. And I used this kind of, Costco model. So Costco kind of basically gives you such bang for the buck, right? If you walk out of Costco with $500 worth of stuff on your cart, you might have just saved 500,
exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So then, because of the stellar meteoric success in year one, we started getting big chain stores asking us if they could sell the products. And eventually we ended up selling our product like we do today to about 100,000 retail outlets, and got up to hundreds of products, risk diversification, and have never lost money. So that was 28 years ago. We've made profit every year. We've grown every year. And we tend to dominate in the subcategories that we compete in. In our business, subcategories are things like weight loss and energy products and so on. Like in 2009, I basically, had a awakening about doing good in the world. I was hanging around with this group of people for a couple days, including Larry Page, the founder of Google, and the head of NASA's Ames Research Center in Palo Alto, and just some other people like that. And they all wanted to form this institute or organization called Singularity University that was to synthesize all of the technologies that are riding on the tsunami of Moore's law, which is the doubling of computer processing. And those were things like strong AI, genetics, robotics. But they only wanted to use the synthesis of those technologies riding Moore's law to attack what they called the grand challenges, which they defined as problems that, if solved, would impact 1 billion or more people. So then I went back to LA, and I just got really excited and ended up telling my chief of staff, hey, let's just quit business and just go into like nonprofit and try to set up an institute to just use scientific thinking and theoretical innovation to try to discover the unification, the ultimate underlying physical theory, which is still the holy grail, which is to unify the theory of time and space, which is Einstein's general relativity, with the theory of everything else, which is particles. That's quantum mechanics. And nobody's yet been able to figure out how to unify them. And in fact, one theory says the other is incorrect, actually, and vice versa. And the bizarre thing is that quantum mechanics has something to do with consciousness. That is, when you're observing a physical system, your knowledge of what the system is doing changes the physical behavior of the system, not the light interacting with it if you're shining a flashlight on it.
Got it.
And it's a bizarre problem called the measurement problem. It's a problem because why would consciousness, which seems to be an epiphenomenon of high-functioning Homo sapiens, why would that have anything to do with the underlying mathematical physics of reality? It's really bizarre, and it's called the measurement problem because it's an enigma. So this unification of quantum mechanics and the theory of time and space should have something to say about resolving the enigma of the measurement problem. And so that's about consciousness. So that was 12 years ago when I founded that nonprofit, or that not-for-profit, Quantum Gravity Research. And at the same time, I kind of dual tracked, where I was keeping my eye as the CEO on Irwin Naturals, so they could keep that money flowing in, so I could keep paying the PhDs and keep funding the not-for-profit company. And then like 3.5 years ago, I just got this surge of a sort of guidance, if you will, or intuition, to take this brand that had gotten up at that point to like this 80% of households recognizing it, to be the world's first household name, to kind of unapologetically lean into the emerging cannabis industry. And one reason why cannabis, is a high impact social change phenomenon is because people like to alter their consciousness, and they're going to do it some way, somehow. If their drug of choice is alcohol, that's what's going to happen. And some of them are going to get addicted and get liver disease and get into barroom fights. Kids at age 8 years old like to spin on the grass at the park and then fall on the ground and feel that altered consciousness state of dizziness and the giddiness of it.
How did you know my daughter?
Right? But the point is that it apparently may be an innate, because you can go back thousands of years, and all cultures have a way of altering their consciousness through, African dance and drum and psychedelic plant medicine and so on, and alcohol, right? And so caffeine alters your consciousness.
Exactly.
We love to alter our consciousness. So when you have your little moment of altering consciousness with a glass of wine for dinner after a long day of work, you usually are going to go with one conscious altering substance or the other. So when people start using cannabinoids to alter their consciousness, on average, they tend to wean off or discontinue the use of opioids or alcohol, right, to alter their consciousness. And the more that happens, the less barroom fights, the less accidental deaths by opioid overdose will occur. So I feel it's a high impact thing. But the highest impact thing that I am doing with the brand, right? I feel like the highest impact thing in my life is what we're working on at Quantum Gravity Research. But in the world of business, where I want all my endeavors to be socially good and high impact, there's nothing that scares me more than the crushing increase of the mental health crisis. If it were flat, it would scare me less, but it's the increase that scares me. It's been increasing, and we're now up to about 25% of adults, at least in North America, and I'm sure in Europe and other parts of the world, that literally have a diagnosable mental illness, whether that's kind of anxiety-induced insomnia or subclinical PTSD or just good old-fashioned depression that comes and goes. It's a lot of us and growing. And famously, the Wellbutrin, the talk therapy, all of those things help. That's proven. But they don't help profoundly enough to make a major dent in the growing mental health crisis. So then comes along a Gatling gun sequence in recent years of very high-level peer-reviewed clinical studies. There have been these studies going back years before, but this surge of these studies, driven in large part by people like Rick Doblin at MAPS and others, has now brought the academic, medical society, Congress people, and the media and the general public to an almost overnight realization and acknowledgement that this is no longer debatable. There's so many peer-reviewed studies that this is the only way out that we know of from the mental health crisis. So the unfortunate part is that it takes many years to get a plant-based pharmaceutical molecule like psilocybin approved for a broad array of mental health disorders. Johnson & Johnson was the first to get ketamine, which is a psychedelic, approved for one mental health condition, depression. And that's
Spravato,
great. Right? Spravato, that was great that they did that. So Spravato is pretty much ketamine. It's called S-ketamine.
Exactly.
So there's this safe haven in ketamine where, because the law allows a medical doctor to do something called off-label prescription, a doctor is allowed to take a person who has anxiety or PTSD and say, okay, I'm going to do a treatment of 5 or 6 ketamine infusions, and you have maybe a 70% chance of being healed. Okay. And so the patients are doing it. And so today we have over 600 ketamine clinics across America and growing. Like 2 years ago, it wasn't 600. We have 179,000 dental clinics, and not all people go to the dentist once a year. So with 25% of the population suffering from mental problems, we need a heck of a lot more than 600 ketamine clinics. And what we need is a mega brand in the space, because mega brands actually, they help society. And here's when and how. When there's a mega brand, you're able to tell people about your product or service in a way that can be up to an order of magnitude less expensive. And that's because a mega super brand tends to have a national or global footprint in its distribution. And national advertising in the US compared to local advertising, it can be up to 10 times cheaper. Furthermore, if it's a famous brand that people have heard, then instead of the standard 6 gross impressions or advertising, moments, you might need 3. Okay, so those two things together combine to make an efficiency, because one of the most expensive aspects of a psychedelic mental health clinic, like one of these ketamine clinics, is the new patient acquisition. Now, you can wait around for years for word of mouth to spread and testimonials, and that'll slowly grow your business. But if you really want to do some impact in your community, you need to get a couple. You're a clinic owner, you need to get several clinics going. You need to really get these appointment books filled up, and the only way to do that as fast as you want is to be able to advertise. So that's where we can come in, and we can also take over as we acquire these clinics, we can take over the thankless task of collecting and money from insurance companies, which play games and try to not pay. We can advertise and generate new patients that come into clinics at a far more economical rate. And essentially we lower, in a strength in numbers philosophy, we lower clinic operating costs, which my game plan is then to pass those savings on to the public with an emphasis on sliding scales. So I want to basically allow a professional like myself who might need this treatment, it's going to save my life. I'm happy to pay, $3,000. Like, it's 6 treatments. It's not crazy. It's worth it. But then allow that cost recovery from the economies of scale to create a budget to give pro bono or free service to out of work, low income rape victim or veteran, and then have a sliding scale in increments that allows us to not have to turn away anybody, right, for lack of funds. And so that's my dream, to get to that level and to have it be that everybody wins. The investors who gamble on me by buying our stock, the patients, the clinics who gamble on me by believing that we can handle this roll up
Mm-hmm.
and create a consistent and amazing patient experience. So that's
the goal.
That's what my goal is. Our profits go up ridiculously fast over the next couple of years because in organic,
Mm-hmm.
so for your listeners, right, who don't know, organic growth is just when a business just fights trench by trench to get new customers and make new products, and that's slow growth. But when you do a roll up, that's when you're basically using either cash or stock to invite hundreds of other players into the family and have a strength in numbers philosophy. And you're basically having those, if they're all profitable, just increase profit and top line revenue kind of overnight.
Okay.
It's almost financial magic, these roll-ups. It's like an arbitrage play.
Got it. So, I mean, so many points that I love and to respond to. So as you said, right? So create these efficiencies of scale, right? The opportunity certainly right now is with ketamine clinics. And I agree with you that it's indisputable in terms of the research right now. Frankly, look, there's good research in the 50s and 60s until Nixon weaponized it for political purposes.
Right.
And the difference now is that when everyone started delving back into the research, we could actually do brain scans, right? And see neural pathways closing because of treatment-resistant depression. And, the expression opening your mind literally is true.
That's right.
Right?
That's
I mean,
right.
I just covered in the podcast, that meta study with Psilocybin, covering the two other studies. And you have these neural pathways reopening and staying open. Right? Like you cannot debate the science anymore. And I think one of my favorite things in covering all the news on the macro level, and the most surprising thing, but awesome thing is in the state legislatures, the progress on psychedelics since January is astounding.
Yeah.
Utah.
It's picking up momentum.
Like Republican-sponsored legislation.
That's right.
Right? And so, I mean, with CBD, right, we had this built-in use case of kids with awful seizure disorders and moms taking their kids into these lawmakers, offices saying everything wasn't working, couple drops, 80% reduction in seizures. And I was like, all right, so the obvious use case with psychedelics is, veterans with PTSD, right? And so I think the science is all there. And I love the mission and like doing growth and how the efficiencies of having a recognized brand and applying to this market could help you do good by subsidizing, right? Yeah. And it's also something where I think that there is more of a focus on brands that it is almost a selling point in terms of doing good for customers, right? So the customer coming and paying $3,000 for that sequence of treatments feels like they're contributing, right? By knowing that they're actually subsidizing for people who need this and can't necessarily afford it. Yeah. So ketamine, you could have these clinics, you could have it around. And then it's, I guess, a matter of, and the ultimate goal of expanding the toolkit with the different psychedelics as they come online, right? Because the pathways that we have are what, as you said, the slow, steady, but very obviously exciting pharmaceutical grade deployment pathway. Yes. And then the pathway that's being explored on the state levels with, Oregon in the lead, right? Where that ketamine clinic will also be a psilocybin clinic.
Exactly. Locked and loaded. Like as soon as the legal coverage is there in a place like Oregon that moves early. And then when there's perhaps a federal legalization, we're just ready to add that in. I can't yet find a fly in the ointment, right? A major fly in the ointment of the game plan. So I'm getting increasingly excited. We closed a clinic with 6 locations.
Great.
And did that press release Monday and got, a whole bunch of others in the process of the due diligence. And
so it's just expand the brand, right? And because you have the capability now across all the different states. And then as they come online, right? And the different programs and they're successful, like I still don't think, here's my question for you, Klee. Like, do you think that there's going to be, look at the Oregon regs, we're talking clients and everything. Do you think that there's going to be a model where there's microdosing, that it's going to be out there because of the capability that if you're, unless they're coming up with a model, they could really restrict the access to specifically give people, I guess if they pick up a pill at a certain place, that they could do that. Yeah. But, would there be, I'm curious to know if you think that's going to...
The interesting thing about psilocybin, microdosing, there's a couple of interesting things about it that are different than cannabis. So one is that unlike cannabis, which kind of can get you high and it's very pleasurable. It's not addictive, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
But psychedelics, real entheogens, they're not really suited for, college dorm recreational abuse. They get abused, but it's not that fun. I mean, it's more like it's mind expanding, it's deep, but it really causes you to face your inner demons and deal with your stuff. And so that's one thing. And then the other thing is it has this indigenous connection, even more so than marijuana, which has an indigenous connection. And there's a knowledge of the unfairness of how Westerners can just come in, take over the world society and just basically dictate to indigenous people who have used these as rites of passage in their very culture for generations and say, oh, guess what? We just decided it's literally unethical. Like it's a sin, right? Because we certainly can't say that there's an LD50, which is a dose that where it's 50% of the amount to kill you. There's no known LD50 for something like psilocybin. There's no known diseases like liver disease or something. Yeah. So what they just kind of said is, well, it's just unethical. It's a sin. It's almost like a Judeo-Christian ethos that was applied. Now that Judeo-Christian ethos always changes.
Yes.
So you could have a few years ago, the sort of, far right is like, oh my God, it's a sin. But then now they're like, oh, no, it helps veterans. So it's not a sin. So that's good. That's a good, that's a good shift.
That's progress. And I think ultimately things open up during, things, step back. But I think ultimately it's all heading in the right direction because ultimately, because it speaks to it. I find it funny you're saying in terms of shifting Judeo-Christian values, right? So as a Jewish guy, I like to say that each of us, and this is, applied to Jews or others, we pick and choose which of the rules we're going to follow or not, right? My favorite one is this actually during Passover right now is, a couple of years ago, they said, oh, no, rice is okay on Passover. Sushi's in, right? Ashkenazi. They just, okay, where'd that come from? No, we changed our viewpoint. Yeah. It's like, interpreting the Constitution and applying it to the stuff that we're dealing with today.
Right.
But I agree that it's, all of this ultimately, I think, is progress and it's surprisingly, quick progress. And so, I'm curious to know with your deep understanding of the science, like which of the psychedelics, which of the applications, separate and apart necessarily from the business model, are do you think are most exciting?
Great. So let's break it into 3 examples. So we've got a word called Entheogen.
Yes.
So an entheos is the Greek word for God. And so some of these plant-based psychedelics like, ayahuasca and magic mushrooms, they kind of remind you of kind of making contact with higher consciousness, like God or something. And they have some visuals and they have these epiphanies of realization and they have ego disassociation.
Yes.
Okay. Where you feel like you're connected with the universe and you don't feel as separate and alone. Okay. So then let's go to ketamine. So, and they call those plant-based entheogens psychedelics.
Exactly. The psychedelic is this, when I remember getting into the nitty gritty and understanding that all this stuff is thrown under the banner of psychedelics, right? And it's a lot more nuanced than that, right?
So that's the entheogenic psychedelics, the plant-based molecules typically. And then you've got ketamine, which is not plant-based, but it is a strong ego disassociative.
Exactly.
And it has a lower level psychedelica, which is the idea of visual patterns and things like this. But it is that ego disassociation that allows someone to have a breakthrough in thought. Let me just riff on that for a second. So imagine you're a boy and from age 6 years old to 15 years old, your overbearing father has told you that you're a dimwit, an idiot. But he's told you that so many times, you can't even remember how many. And it got baked into your subconscious. So now you're an adult and you've done some work on yourself and you've realized, that you're not a dimwit, but yet that little voice hiding in the background of your subconscious that you normally don't always hear, it always has a voice from the distant subconscious realm. Now, that voice prevents you from deeply rearranging the bookshelf of your internal belief systems at a subconscious level. So then you'd go through this hour experience of ego disassociation with ketamine, which is real interesting because you're conscious. It's not like being put to sleep on a tranquilizer where you're half asleep. This is like you're very conscious, but yet you're kind of, you're just in this different space. So you're very conscious and you're ego disassociated. And you think about stuff in that state of consciousness, and you realize at a core level down to the bones, well, I'm not a dimwit. You have an epiphany at a deep level that talk therapy would have maybe never approached. And you did all of that without all of the psychedelica and the entheogenic experiences of a sort of ayahuasca or magic mushrooms. Now let's go to the third example, which is MDMA.
Yeah.
So MDMA is not an ego disassociative, but it's fascinating with respect to ego. So it opens up the experience of empathy, the ability to be sensitive to the pain and the viewpoints of other people. And in some interesting way of phrasing it, that ability to not judge another person for their viewpoint and to feel their pain is part of what does happen when you go through an ego disassociative experience. So it has these qualities that relate to, heart opening and empathy and tolerance, kind of like as though you were ego disassociated, but yet, unlike ketamine and the magic mushrooms, you're very much still aware of yourself. It's just that you have more love and empathy for others around you. And the thing about love and heart-centered things like gratitude, like if you focus in on your children and you just think, oh my God, I love them so damn much, or I'm so grateful for something. And that feeling of gratitude is incongruent with anger, blaming, judgment, and fear. It's like you can't do both. It's kind of like you can't rub your tummy and pat your head at the same time. And so this ability of MDMA to fill your heart with empathy and love and non-judgment, even for a few hours, is a period of hours where the bad part of your ego, the judgy part, kind of goes down, and you can work out, your rigidly held judgments of others. Maybe there's an formerly impenetrable barrier of agreement between you and your overbearing father. And you kind of just learn to see it and accept him for his, as a product of his society. And you really just come through a breakthrough. And then hours later, you're not influenced by the MDMA, but that one epiphany was a decision of a new belief system to have about your father, and it's healing. So those are the differences. And we want to work with all three of those classes of psychedelic. And right now we're just working with what we can do because we want to save lives, prevent suicides, help people's quality of life. And we want to do it fast, and we want to do it now. We want to be greedy for healing, greedy for, how many people we can offer this service to, and greedy to lower costs so we can pass savings on. So ketamine is where we can act now. Yeah.
So we move now. And, it's interesting. And I really appreciate the fact that you delved into the different classes, right? Because you need shorthands, right? Just like the cannabis industry relies upon the sativa indica shorthand when it is bullshit, right? Ultimately, like we need shorthand. And so psychedelic is the term that is used as a shorthand, but it throws in these different classes of drugs. And so when you laid it out, right, as perfectly like that, in terms of these three different things and the benefits that each of them could have, right, in terms of, the first class that connects you to the world, right, the second class is dissociative and gives you kind of almost a shifted perspective instantaneously about your ego, right, and then this last class that's the empathetic, right, in terms of MDMA. So just conceptually, right, all three of those can be freaking beneficial for us, right? So, I mean, what do you think? Would you want to, help design a world where our mental health hygiene essentially is, a periodic, tune-up, right? With one of the three classes, right? They all serve different purposes.
Yeah, they're complementary.
Exactly, right? And so I think that's part of the goal, right? To get us to that point. And look, when you talk about the mental health numbers, there's nothing ever like the pandemic in terms of this isolating force, right? That probably caused so much harm on the mental health level. And the other thing that I think that's been a positive development is just the way that society views mental health and is comfortable talking about it. Right. Like you need progress in that to detach that stigma, to have open conversations, to start addressing it with this.
Which is nice. In the last 5 years, maybe, I've been seeing that progress moving along nicely. People are admitting and talking, and it's no longer a shaming thing as much as it was.
I mean, look, and I think it's silly when you talk about endorsements and everything, but athletes, right? mental health is a subject that comes up for athletes now.
Yeah.
Right.
And
that
back in the day, that was never going to happen.
Never
right?
happened.
What was that program with Oprah? Was it Prince Harry or something?
No, Meghan and Prince Harry when they came
No,
up?
Oprah did a series, and she got all these, people like Lady Gaga and Prince. I think it was Prince Harry. Anyway, they were on there, and it was such world mega. These were very rich people. None of them did it for publicity or for money. They were really willing to put themselves out there because Oprah was putting herself out, and she called in friends, favors, and they basically did. And I think that we need even more of that. Like let thought leaders come out and share their trauma and their share their brokenness, right? I think everybody is broken to one degree or another. And if the leaders and thought leaders are sharing it, the superstars, then it opens up the conversation even more than it is.
Exactly. Right. I mean, I remember, I grew up with Will Smith, who's obviously an interesting person to raise right now, but I'm mentioning the fact that in his biography, he talked about psychedelic usage, right? So someone like that, and when he was coming up with movies or whatever, would never have talked about something like that.
Interesting.
And we're so much more connected to, big names and everything that by social media and everything. Yeah. But we've evolved as a society to be able to shine a light on some of this stuff. And people who were celebrities, like say, a royal who never, it was all about appearances and never showing anything, or athletes that are invulnerable.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And now all of a sudden it brings it out into the open. Yes. And I think that that's a pivotal part too of getting the steps that we need to take to have the business, like you're saying.
Couldn't agree
right.
more.
To, you need that piece. And then we have the proof now on the medical side.
Yes.
And you marry that.
Yes.
And then that's how we get to the really productive steps of building the business, like you're saying.
Agreed.
Right.
Agreed. So thank God we've got this bipartisan support, because when you get the right and the left disagreeing on something, they deadlock stuff to the detriment of society. Like, do you know we're at 91% of Americans polled are supporting legalization of one form or another? 91%. Now, clearly we have a broken democracy if the will of the people is supposed to be implemented in real time by Congress, and years go by with those kind of polling numbers and they still haven't gotten the job done. It's a broken system. And it's that pork trading kind of thing where some Republican will put forth a bill that basically can make marijuana legal and stop the insanity and dry up the black market and the crime. And then the Democrats will block it because they want this or that little thing put in. Okay, there's nothing wrong that they want that put in. But come on, the American people want it. We can worry about adding things in later. But if you just keep stalling it, and then the Republicans do the same thing.
I know. No, I know. I just did the whole federal deep dive episode. And it's, it's incredibly frustrating, right? When you have the opportunity for incremental progress, like safe banking. And, there's a focus, from, the left saying this is just going to benefit the MSOs. But my buddy Tahir Johnson at the U.S. Cannabis Council had an event, right, with minority business owners that said, we are getting negatively impacted by this. We can't bank. 8% of the banks in, credit unions in the U.S. are in this industry. And with that, there's just exorbitant fees. And post-pandemic, right, in terms of how many businesses actually have cash, dispensaries are basically it. And so there are heinous robberies coming out now. A bud tender died just about a month ago.
So I have a few hundred people working for me. I was told by one of my employees yesterday, he said, Klee, unfortunately, I can't close on the new house that me and my family wanted to move in. And I said, why? And he said, well, because once they found out that I worked for Irwin Naturals, and that Irwin Naturals is having something to do with cannabis. I said, even though did you tell him it wasn't plant touching? He said, yeah. And I said, so literally just because you're an employee, you're not even a shareholder, you're just an employee and you can't get financing personally for the house. He said, it's that demonized still, especially in the banking community. The banking community has at this point what is an irrational stance. And the federal government is not running around putting people in jail for cannabis.
No.
They know it's polling. They know it's the bankers. They know it's bipartisan support. It seems that the coast is clear and that just needs to be a bill that has some language that could be agreed upon. But they're taking it that far. And that's going to hurt a minority entrepreneur more so because of racism and the endemic, hundreds of years. it does statistically make it more easy for perhaps a person like me, a white male, to find some rich uncle or something. I don't have any rich uncles, but statistically, I should be more likely, and that's not fair. So then it opens up opportunities really for people of privilege to participate in this industry. And that needs to change. And so I hope that they can pass, for example, the Safe Banking Act and get that slid into some other legislation.
Yeah, the America Competes Act. Ed Perlmutter said, I'm going to put it in every single thing I can before I, retire at the end of the year.
Good.
But, I unfortunately don't have the highest hopes of it. But, I'm just, talking through all this stuff, the ambitions with the business and the good that it can do on the psychedelics is just awesome.
Yeah.
Really, really appreciate that.